One of the most commonly asked questions is, what is the best gaming TV that you can possibly buy? And that answer is a fairly complicated one. Let's start off by talking about the TVs. There's two TVs that are primary RGB tandem OLEDs, that is the LG G5 and the Panasonic Z95B. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically a WOLED with enhanced color capability that is going to try to get very close to what QD-OLED is able to do. So we're definitely going to take a look at how close it actually got. So that means, of course, the other two TVs are going to be QD-OLEDs. The Samsung S95F and the BRAVIA 8 Mark II from Sony. And for full transparency, I just want to let you guys know that Sony did send me the BRAVIA 8 Mark II and the other three TVs I ended up buying from the store myself. And if you want to help me with future comparisons, one of the best ways you could do so is by buying your next TV from one of my affiliate links in the description below when you are ready to buy your next TV. Thank you guys so much for your support. Now let's continue on with the rest of the video. So now that you know the TV technology behind all the TVs, let's talk about the TV features a little bit before we get into picture quality and the overall performance of these TVs. I'm not going to be able to go over all the included features, as a lot of them are going to be repeating features that are also on other TVs, and most of the TVs will have the same exact features. But I do want to talk about some unique features that the TVs have. Let's start off with Samsung. They have Game Motion Plus. This is motion interpolation for gaming, and this is going to allow you to play 30 frames per second games and kind of make them feel more like they're in 60 frames per second. And that's one great thing that this does, and it is with low latency in mind. So you're only looking at about 25 milliseconds of input lag for the Samsung with Game Motion Plus on, and this is a really good result for the most part, and you're not going to have very many issues gaming this way. This is one of the best ways to game on a Samsung in my opinion, and it is the only way that I game on the Samsung. With the Sony in mind, they have a thing called reality creation, and this is really one of Sony's X factors for their game mode, and this is something that I really love about the Sony TVs and console gaming, because you really have the ability to have this extra form of upscaling, and that's kind of the best way that I can describe it to you. To this day, I'm quite amazed at how good this feature works, and if you're playing a game that has poor textures, or maybe you have a PC game that you can't quite drive the maximum resolution on, or you can't go ultra settings on, this is going to be an X factor for you, because it's going to clean up the textures even more, and it feels like you just kind of have an extra texture pack within your TV itself. So it's cleaning up the image, giving you really good clarity overall, and no other TV can do it. For something that is more unique to the LG, they do have the ability to have a black stabilizer and a white stabilizer, and this is going to allow you to customize the image in your game mode a little bit more to your liking, especially if you're running into a game that has a raised black floor. Having controls like this gives you the ability to fix those things if you are running into that with your game. There is also some fine-tuned black adjustments that you can do as well to alleviate these types of problems. I do want to say that the ability to change the black levels of your TV is not exclusive to LG, but it is going to be something that is a little bit more fine-tuned adjustments on the LG than the other TVs, where the Sony and the Panasonic just have a black adjust. So if you want to help fix the black level floor in those games with those TVs, it's certainly possible. With the Samsung, however, it's a little bit more difficult to do, and since they don't have a black level control, this is going to be a lot harder to adjust these things. Now, the Panasonic doesn't have anything that sticks out to me as being really unique to their TV, but they do have something that does rather make a difference when it comes down to the out-of-the-box picture mode, and that is definitely going to be the true game mode that you put your TV in. This is going to give you filmmaker mode like quality out of your TV for your game mode. So if you're somebody that likes the accuracy side of gaming, you're going to love the Panasonic for this result. The Sony is also going to be in this category, as well as their game mode by default does look very similar to their professional mode. So they are going to have really good looking pictures, in my opinion, out of the box, as I do prefer a more accurate image for my game mode, as I do think that more and more games are more realistic, so you are going to get better skin tones with these options for those types of games. Now, if you're somebody that likes a more poppy image out of the box or something a little bit more colorful and exaggerated, then that is where the Sony and the Panasonic may seem a little bit flat out of the box for you. But the Panasonic does have a regular game mode option that matches this type of profile that the LG and the Samsung give you. So the LG and the Samsung by default will have this look, and the Panasonic you'll have to put it in the actual game mode instead of the true game mode to get this look. For the Sony, you're going to have to do some tweaking to get this look because they're not really going to give you this look out of the box. The LG G5, the S95F from Samsung, and the Panasonic Z95B all have capable modes that will follow HGIG guidelines. The Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II, on the other hand, that will not do that. This always has dynamic tone mapping, always on, and there's no way to disable it on this TV. That said, the HDR capability of this TV is still pretty good, although out of the box I will say that it is a little lackluster and you're going to want to crank up the contrast a little bit to make the HDR impact just a little bit better. Another thing you'll want to know is that the 165Hz capability is only going to be on the LG G5 and the Samsung S95F, while the Panasonic Z95B only has 144Hz and the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II has 120Hz. It's also worth noting that the HDMI 2.1 ports on these TVs is limited to 2 on both the Sony and the Panasonic, while the LG and the Samsung have 4. So let's talk about the topic of color when it comes down to these TVs. I think the color on all of these TVs is just fine for game mode. It's going to be good enough for most people. But if you do want that extra edge, you're going to have to choose one of the QD OLEDs. So many different examples of colors that just look so much better on the Sony and the Samsung because they are QD OLED. And so wrapping up the HDR side of things, I'll say this, they're very similar in all circumstances for their HDR game mode, and they trade blows. Sometimes the G5 is the brightest TV of them all. Sometimes the S95F is the brightest TV of them all, and sometimes the Panasonic Z95B is the brightest TV of them all. And yes, there are some cases where the BRAVIA 8 Mark II is the brightest TV of them all. Though I do have to say these are use cases that involve using the brightness preferred method. So you're doing this by changing the HDR tone mapping. And when I see these differences where the Sony ends up being the brighter TV, this is even with the TVs in dynamic tone mapping themselves. The other TVs are all with dynamic tone mapping on. So yeah, it's just different dynamic tone mapping algorithms at play here, I think, when it comes down to these results. I will say that when the Sony is pushed like this, you will notice some dimming happening with the Sony over time, and this is something that does occur on all the TVs over time with the dynamic tone mapping being on and kind of pushing the brightness to the maximum for all the TVs. This is when they are all vulnerable to some type of dimming algorithm. And this is going to be another topic that I want to tackle really quickly, is the dimming algorithm. So when this dynamic tone mapping is on, yes, the Sony does appear to be the first to dim, followed by the Panasonic, followed by the LG, followed by the Samsung. Sometimes it changes and the Samsung is actually the third to dim and the LG is last to dim with the dynamic tone mapping on. The roles are reversed though when the dynamic tone mapping is off and you're using kind of the out of the box gradation preferred and the HGIG settings for the other TVs. Then when you do kind of have a more controlled method, we're not seeing as much dimming from either of the TVs, though what I did notice was the LG and the Samsung are the first to dim in these circumstances, where the Panasonic is third, and the Sony didn't seem to dim at all when it was pushed in this type of way. So when you're not really pushing the extreme out of the TVs, the Sony doesn't seem to dim, and they all don't really seem to dim that often when it comes down to this. It all really depends on a few factors, and one of those is going to be the average picture level, the APL of the TV, and this is what's going to be on the screen itself. So is the scene changing a lot? Are you constantly in the same type of area? Chances are, if the scene is not changing a lot and you have static elements, you are more vulnerable to dimming. But if the scene is changing more constantly and you are always changing the average picture level, then you're not going to be vulnerable to dimming to the same degree. Even if static elements are present, it just doesn't seem like these TVs are going to react that way. But it does seem like it depends on how you play. definitely with dynamic tone mapping, and when it comes down to the average picture level of the actual game that you're playing. So if you're playing a game like a sports game that doesn't switch the scene that often, and there's not very many cutscenes that are going to end up changing the average picture level, then what you're going to notice is that these are going to be the types of games that are more vulnerable to dimming over time. And I have seen this on all the TVs. The Sony is going to be the most vulnerable when you are in dynamic tone mapping, as is the Panasonic. But when it comes down to being outside of that, then the LG and the Samsung are the most vulnerable. When it comes down to when they are the most vulnerable in general is going to be within the SDR gaming modes. And the Sony is certainly the most vulnerable in that case, where you are going to see a lot of dimming from the Sony in the SDR game mode, the Panasonic as well, and the Samsung and the LG have their fair share of dimming over time, though not as bad as the Sony with SDR in mind. Staying on the topic of SDR, I want to talk about the SDR performance in terms of the brightness capability from these TVs. So if you're somebody that plays in a bright room and you need the extra brightness, this is going to be a good cause for you. Or you're somebody that maybe just likes the brightness to be driven up in SDR, this is also going to be a good cause for you. So let's talk about where these TVs excel. With SDR brightness in mind, there's no doubt about it, the Samsung S95F was the one that was always punching ahead of all the other TVs, with the exception sometimes being the Panasonic Z95B. This was trading blows with the S95F in SDR brightness quite a bit, so there was times where these ones did go back and forth at which one was the brightest. So if you're looking for SDR brightness out of your game mode, yeah, the Panasonic Z95B and the S95F are really great choices. Now, on the other hand, choices that still get the job done and probably bright enough for most people, the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II did seem like it wasn't the brightest of the four, and the LG G5 wasn't too far behind that. These were two disappointing TVs in SDR brightness when it came down to comparing them to the Z95B and the Samsung S95F. Those were certainly brighter than the BRAVIA 8 Mark II and the LG G5. I would say that the Sony was probably the dimmest of them all for the SDR brightness capabilities. Next, I want to talk about the potential artifacts that you can run into with these game modes in mind, and they all have posterization to some degree, but the worst of them all is definitely the LG G5. This had way more artifacts than any other TV that I tested between these four TVs. You could definitely see more instances of posterization, and sometimes when you were looking at the flickering images on the screen, like candles, or you're maybe in a dimly lit room, you could see this pulsating effect on the ground or on the walls that the other TVs just didn't exhibit, or if they did exhibit, they weren't in that same degree of intensity. And you could see that the G5 just didn't have as clean of an image overall compared to the four TVs. In third place was the Panasonic Z95B. This definitely did have some instances of posterization in game mode, though not as bad as the LG G5. So despite having the same panel, we can't blame it all on the panel. Some of this is LG's processing. Now let's talk about that scary word, image retention. You could see that the LG G5, when met with this image retention, is going to take a lot longer than the other TVs to get rid of, and it does seem to be more pronounced as you just see it more clearly on the G5 than the other TVs. The other TVs certainly have image retention, but they do clear up faster than the LG G5. For me, when it comes down to the best gaming TV overall, with a lot of things considered and you have to weigh things back and forth, I think for me, I have to say that the Samsung S95F is the overall best TV for gaming, with the Sony BRAVIA 8 Mark II coming in at third, but with console gaming in mind, you could actually put it first because of that reality creation effect. I would say that coming in at second place would be the Panasonic Z95B if you are a console gamer, because if you're a PC gamer, then you'll probably weight the G5 higher than the Z95B, where the G5 has 165Hz capability, where the Z95B has 144Hz, and the Sony, of course, has 120Hz, so that's one that you'll put on the bottom of the list if you are a PC gamer. But I'd love to know which one would you guys be buying, if any at all. If you guys have any questions at all, leave them in the comments, and if you want to keep watching TV comparisons, definitely check out this one right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.